At 0730 local time, 14 Chinese J-15s screamed off the Liaoning flight deck in the East China Sea, one every 45 seconds. More aircraft than the carrier had ever sortied in a single evolution. Whatever Beijing was protecting, they wanted it hidden behind a wall of fighters. But unknown to the Chinese, 4 Japanese F-15Js were watching from 25,000 feet, outnumbered nearly 4-1. They should have turned back. Instead, the flight leader rolled toward the swarm. For the next 47 minutes, while fighting for survival against impossible odds, these 4 pilots would expose a fatal flaw in Chinese carrier doctrine, one Beijing will spend years regretting. The Chinese J-15s climbed to meet them, 14 fighters spreading into a wall between the Japanese F-15Js and the carrier. The flight leader felt his pulse spike. Numbers on a radar screen don't capture the gut check of watching 14 aircraft rise towards you with nowhere to run. His APG-63 radar could track 20 targets simultaneously, each Chinese J-15 tagged with altitude, heading, and course rate before the screen finished refreshing. The Chinese radar picture wasn't nearly as clean. The J-15's Type 1493 is a generation behind, struggling to process 14 friendlies and 4 enemies against ocean clutter. Where the Japanese flight leaders saw chess pieces arranged on a board, the Chinese flight lead saw a strobe-lit crowd he had to count by hand. First advantage, Japan. The swarm moved with the coordination of a drill team, 14 aircraft cycling into a screen, each pilot holding position exactly where doctrine told him to be. Impressive. In a way, a marching band is impressive. But marching bands don't win dogfights. The F-15J pilots circling above had trained against American aggressor squadrons that made this look like amateur hour. The J-15 settled into a wall at 20,000 feet, 5,000 below the Japanese, and started herding. Every time the F-15Js headed east, the Chinese slid the block. Every correction toward the aircraft carrier, Liaoning drew more fighters into intercept positions. The message was clear: you're not getting any closer to our carrier. The flight leader let them think that's what he wanted. He checked his fuel gauge the way a diver checks his air tank. He launched from Okinawa 90 minutes ago with 13,400 pounds of JP-8, and cruise flight had burned through 4,200 of it. That left 9,200 pounds, which sounds like plenty until you understand how fighters think. In normal flight, the F-15J sips fuel like a Prius. Hit afterburners and it starts drinking like its last call. 3 times the consumption, 3 times the urgency to finish the fight before the tanks force you to leave since you're out of fuel. The Chinese made their first aggressive move at 0817. That's when they started making mistakes. The 4 J-15s broke from the screen and lit afterburners, engines punching from cruise power to full reheat. The burst looked aggressive. It was actually desperate, the kind of fuel-burning show of force that impresses admirals but makes tacticians wince. Those engines gulp 47,000 pounds of fuel per hour in afterburner, and the J-15 carries 14,500 total. 3 minutes of full reheat burns almost a quarter of your gas, burning your reserves and making bailing out a non-zero chance. 40 miles of separation became 30 in 90 seconds, then 20. Combined closure rate, 1,100 miles per hour. At 12 miles, the flight leader's radar warning receiver lit up, the cockpit system that tells you when someone's pointing their radar at you and whether they're just looking or actually aiming. Search mode sweeps like a lighthouse. Track mode locks on like a laser pointer. The warble in his headset said track. Then Eagle 2's receiver screamed the same warning. Then 3. Then 4. In the space of 2 seconds, all 4 Japanese fighters went from being watched to being aimed at. 4 J-15s at 10 miles. Fire control radars locked. The J-15s pressed to 8 miles. Then 6. Then 4. Close enough to see the airframes clearly through the canopy. Those distinctive cropped delta wings that look impressive until you understood the compromise they represented. The F-15 is a copy of Russian design that was already outdated when the Soviet Union collapsed. The F-15J facing them was the most successful air superiority fighter in modern history. 104 victories, 0 losses in combat. The Chinese split their formation, too high, too low, bracketing the Japanese from vertical angles. The maneuver looked aggressive, but it cost energy they'd need later. The high pair lost 3,000 feet climbing. The low pair gained 2,000 feet they'd have to burn off again. Energy in a dogfight is altitude and speed combined, and the Chinese had just spent both to look intimidating. The flight leader made his decision in half a second. Defensive split, 2 and 3 pulling high while lead and 4 dove low. The maneuver was a trap, and the Chinese walked right into it. By splitting, the flight leader forced the J-15s to choose: concentrate on one pair and let the other get behind them, or split their split and dilute their advantage across 4 separate engagements. The Chinese followed doctrine: split and pursue, maintain pressure on all 4 targets. It's what their manual said. The problem with manuals is that they don't mean much when the actual shooting starts. The flight leader rolled into his nearest pursuer, 6 Gs pushing him into the ejection seat hard enough to narrow his vision. He was able to catch up because the F-15J's twin F-100 engines pumped out 47,000 pounds of combined thrust, giving it a thrust-to-weight ratio that let it accelerate in a vertical climb. The J-15's engines managed 25,500 pounds each. Impressive on paper, but the J-15 was heavier, draggier, and carrying carrier landing penalties the F-15 didn't need. The massive F-15 wing, 608 square feet of lifting surface, let the flight leader sustain 6 Gs at 330 knots without losing speed. Think of wing loading like weight on a surfboard. The lighter you are relative to board size, the easier you carve through turns. The F-15J carried its weight like an Olympic gymnast. The J-15, with its smaller wing hauling more mass, moved like a linebacker attempting ballet. The Chinese pilot tried to match the turn at 350 knots, and that's when physics handed him the bill. His nose dropped despite full backstick. At that speed and G-load, his wings simply couldn't generate enough lift to hold the turn level. The aircraft needed 410 knots to sustain this rate of turn. He was 60 knots short, and the missing energy had to come from somewhere. It came from altitude, 3,000 feet of it, seeping away while the stick shaker rattled in his hand. That mechanical vibration, warning him the wing was about to stop flying altogether. He broke off to save his aircraft. The Chinese manual said pursue aggressively. Japanese training said anticipate the exact move and punish it. One pilot was following a script, the other was writing one. The flight leader rolled out nose on to the diving J-15 and held the lock for 3 seconds, simulated intercept. In a real engagement, that aircraft would be falling from the sky. But 2 more J-15s were already vectoring in from the screen, fresh fighters with full energy rotating forward while the tired ones fell back. This was the swarm's real weapon, not 14 fighters attacking at once, but 14 fighters taking turns. Marathon pressure designed to drain Japanese fuel and concentration until someone made a mistake. What they didn't have was pilots who could match the Japanese in a turning fight. 20 minutes in, the pattern was clear. Every time a J-15 committed to a pursuit, the F-15Js would pull into a turn the Chinese jets couldn't follow. The J-15 would lose energy, fall behind the power curve, and break off. The Chinese were losing every one-on-one engagement, compensating with numbers that couldn't hide the skill gap. The rotation timing never varied. Communication burst 12 seconds before each handoff, same geometry every time. The Chinese had practiced until it was perfect and predictable. The F-15's electronic warfare suites and radars captured it all: the specific frequencies, the timing intervals, the handoff geometry. In a real war, that data would let Japanese aircraft disrupt the rotations at the exact moment of handoff, when the swarm was most vulnerable. Every predictable pattern was a future weakness. Beijing was running a drill. Japan was writing the counter playbook. But that was the future. Right now, they still had to win this fight. Eagle 4 caught a J-15 fixated on the lead, swept in from the beam with a radar lock the Chinese pilot never saw coming. 3 seconds of intercept tone. The Chinese pilot broke hard and slunk back into his formation. In debriefs, Beijing would call this valuable combat experience. The Japanese would call it target practice. But 26 minutes in, the J-15 flight lead did something unexpected. He stopped trying to win the dogfight and started trying to win the war. Instead of pressing for intercepts, he ordered his swarm to force defensive reactions, to make the F-15s turn hard, burn fuel, drain them dry without ever winning an engagement. It was the smart play. It was also the first sign that the Chinese flight leader understood what he was actually facing. The flight leader checked his fuel, 3,200 pounds. 4 had 2,900. Bingo was 1,500, the minimum needed to limp back to Naha. That left maybe 18 minutes of combat before physics made the decision for them. Reinforcements were still 12 minutes out. The swarm smelled opportunity. Fresh J-15s pushed forward in pairs now, the rotations coming faster. The Chinese had done the math. 2 F-15Js with draining tanks against 10 fighters with a carrier to refuel from. All they had to do was keep pressing until the fuel gauges made cowards out of everyone. For the first time in 30 minutes, the Japanese flight leader felt doubt. He and 4 flew the tightest weave of their careers, crossing turns so precise they could have been choreographed. The Chinese kept trying. They kept failing. The skill gap was a canyon, and numbers alone couldn't bridge it. But skill doesn't fill fuel tanks. The flight leader felt the margins compressing. Every afterburner burst was a calculation. Could he afford 30 seconds of reheat to shake this pursuer? Or would that 30 seconds be the difference between landing at Naha and ejecting over open ocean? The swarm didn't have to beat him. They just had to outlast him. Then Eagle 2's voice cut through the radar chatter with 2 words that rewrote the tactical picture. Bombers inbound. Bearing 010, 80 miles north. 4 aircraft painting too big on radar to be anything else. The swarm wasn't the mission. It was the distraction from something that could literally destroy Japan if things went kinetic. The flight leader's radar painted the bomber formation at 78 miles, and suddenly the whole tactical picture made sense. 2 Tu-95 MS Bears leading the pack. Russian strategic bombers with radar signatures the size of buildings. Soviet museum pieces, but carrying enough cruise missiles to flatten every port city in western Japan. The H-6Ks tucked behind were worse. Chinese copies of an obsolete Soviet design, each carrying 6 CJ-20 cruise missiles, 28 missiles total, enough to hit Tokyo, Yokosuka, Naval Base, Kaneda, and Sasebo simultaneously. They just had to reach their launch basket. Launch position was 12 minutes away. Reinforcements from Naha were 15 minutes out. Japan had -3 minutes to solve an impossible problem. The flight leader faced a choice with no good options, except he trained for exactly this scenario. Split the fight, face both threats at half strength, and trust that Japanese training would overcome Chinese numbers the same way they'd have to do it in a real fight. At 0824, Eagles 2 and 3 lit afterburners and pulled north toward the bombers. Flight leader and 4 stayed with the swarm. The flight leader watched them go and immediately knew he'd made a mistake. He'd forgotten to check his fuel state after the last afterburner engagement. The gauge read 1,800 pounds. Bingo was 1,500. 300 pounds of margin, maybe 4 minutes, and reinforcements still had 8 minutes out. He just trapped himself below survival fuel with 10 J-15s circling. 2 aircraft against 10. The Chinese must have been measuring for victory ribbons. The J-15s pressed hard, sensing weakness, fresh fighters rotating in from multiple angles, trying to overwhelm the reduced formation. But 2 F-15Js flying a defensive weave created geometry that numbers alone couldn't crack. Each crossing turn positioned 1 aircraft to punish anyone who committed too hard to the other. Attack lead, the 4 rolls in behind you. Commit to 4, and the lead sweeps your 6. A J-15 pressed inside 2 miles on the flight leader, nose tracking, fire control radar locked. The Chinese pilot had done everything his instructors taught him. The problem was, his instructors had never faced pilots like these. Eagle 4 came in from the beam at 520 knots, the F-15J's superior acceleration letting him build speed the J-15 couldn't match, and his radar lock tone flooded the Chinese cockpit with the sound of simulated destruction. The J-15 broke hard, suddenly defensive, pulling 7 Gs in a desperate turn that dropped airspeed below 300 knots. At that speed and G load, the aircraft's fly-by-wire computers stepped in, limiting angle of attack to keep the jet from tumbling. The Chinese pilot wasn't flying anymore. His computers were flying, and his computers were saying no. He recovered and limped back to formation, another learning experience for Beijing's after-action reports, another simulated victory for Japan. 6 minutes to reinforcements. The flight leader's fuel gauge read 1,600 pounds, 100 above bingo. Flight leader, our guys are 2 minutes out. He glanced at his gauge, 1,550 pounds, dropping faster than predicted. 4 fresh F-15Js from Naha finally appeared on radar, screaming south at Mach 1.4. The cavalry had arrived. The swarm saw the new contacts too, and the rotations hesitated. Fresh Japanese fighters meant the numbers advantage was about to evaporate. The J-15s began pulling back toward the Liaoning. The flight leader had held for 47 minutes, 2 aircraft against 10 for the final 20. He'd make it back to Naha with maybe 30 pounds above bingo, enough for one approach, no go-around. But the bombers were still pushing for the Miyako Strait. 50 miles north, Eagles 2 and 3 were closing on the bombers. 4 J-16 escorts turned to intercept, China's most advanced operational fighter, the one Beijing actually trusts for real combat. Better radar, more fuel, PL-15 missiles with 200-kilometer range. On paper, 4 J-16s against 2 F-15Js should have been decisive. But paper doesn't account for 10,000 hours of training against American aggressor squadrons. The Chinese pilots did what their training demanded: intercept the incoming threat before it reaches the asset. Standard doctrine. The problem with standard doctrine is that it's standard, which means your enemy studied it too. The J-16s accelerated toward the F-15Js in a textbook pincher, too high and too low. Their PL-15 missiles had the range advantage, 200 kilometers versus the F-15J's 120. If this became a long-range missile duel, the math favored China. Eagle 2 had no intention of letting it become a long-range missile duel. 40 miles. The J-16's AESA radars painted both F-15Js with targeting solutions. 30 miles. The Chinese were waiting for optimal firing distance. 20 miles. Decision point. Eagle 2 could turn and fight, engage the J-16s in the merge, trust superior skill to overcome the numbers disadvantage. But that would take time, and time meant the bombers reached the launch position. Or he could do something the Chinese would never expect. He kept his nose pointed at the bombers and shoved the throttles into afterburner. The F-15J leapt forward, acceleration shoving him back into the ejection seat as the twin F-100s pushed past 50,000 pounds of combined thrust. Eagle 3 matched him on the wing, both jets punching through Mach 1.1 and still accelerating. They weren't turning to fight, they were going straight through. The J-16 pilots had maybe 3 seconds to react. They positioned themselves for an intercept, not a joust. Instead, 2 F-15Js were screaming directly at them at a combined closure rate of 1,400 miles per hour. The J-16 flight leader made the right call, brake and re-engage from behind. The problem was, competent wasn't enough. The high pair broke right, the low pair broke left. Eagle 3's wingtip cleared the nearest J-16 by what felt like inches, but the F-15Js were already past them, through the escort screen before the J-16s completed their first turn. The Chinese pilots hauled their aircraft around, afterburners blazing, but they'd broken in opposite directions, which meant they had to reform before pursuing. By the time they sorted themselves out, the F-15Js were 10 miles ahead. At 0847, the Tu-95 flight leader saw 2 Japanese fighters appear directly ahead, and his options collapsed to 0. The Bear's defensive guns were useless against fighters smart enough to stay off the 6 o'clock. His J-16 escorts were behind the Japanese now, out of position. His cruise missiles needed another 200 kilometers to reach launch range, 24 minutes at current speed. 2 F-15Js had just given him 6. He was a professional, 20 years flying strategic bombers. He knew what he was looking at. He banked east, away from Miyako, away from the launch box, away from the mission Moscow and Beijing had spent months coordinating. The H-6Ks followed. Then the J-16s turned back, escorts with nothing left to escort. 2 Japanese pilots who refused to flinch. Months of planning, gone. But here's what Beijing didn't realize until weeks later. The dogfight was never the mission. From the moment the Liaoning started launching, the F-15J's electronic warfare suites had been recording everything. Every radar frequency, every communication burst, every formation pattern, handoff protocol, and tactical adjustment the swarm made under pressure. 47 minutes of Chinese carrier doctrine captured in perfect detail. The bombers turning back was a tactical win. The intelligence harvest was the strategic victory. If you enjoyed this video, check out our other video on a Chinese intercept. Bye for now.